Did you know that three quarters of the annual 85,000 H1B visas issued by the United States are cornered by Indian techies? Did you know that Elon Musk, one of the biggest supporters of the H1B program, was himself an immigrant who came in and worked on the H1B visa? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. An unsavory spat broke out in the camp of President-elect Donald Trump over the issue of H1B visas. Yes, both sides have since pulled back from the brink, but the fault lines in the incoming administration are more than visible. More importantly, this ugly face-off in public has put the spotlight on the H1B visa program, the lifeline for Indian tech majors like Infosys and TCS. The big question is, how will this debate play out when President Trump takes over on January 20th? Will it force a rollback of the H1B program? Should the Indian American community, which has been in the spotlight over the H1B controversy, fear a backlash? To answer these vexing questions and more, I spoke to Mark Krikorian. He's the executive director of the Washington-based Center for Immigration Studies. But before we dive into our conversation, here is a brief explainer on the H1B controversy.
India has become a central focus in the debate on H1B visas due to its dominant role in the program and the significant economic and political implications tied to it. Here are the main reasons for India's prominence in this debate. Majority of H1B visa holders are Indian. Indian nationals consistently account for the largest share of H1B visas, often exceeding 70% of the total issued annually. This dominance is driven by India's strong presence in the IT sector, with companies and professionals specializing in software development, engineering, and other technology-related fields. Indian IT outsourcing companies. Indian IT firms such as TCS, Infosys, and Wipro are major users of the H1B visa program. These firms often send Indian professionals to the US to work on client projects. Critics argue that such companies use the program to lower labor costs and replace US workers, fueling the perception of exploitation. High-skilled talent pool in India. India produces a large number of highly skilled engineers and technology professionals annually, making it a key supplier of global talent. Indian STEM graduates often see the H1B visa as a pathway to international career opportunities and US residency. Economic impact on India. Remittances. Indian H1B workers send substantial remittances back home, contributing significantly to India's economy. Brain drain concerns. India's reliance on the H1B program has sparked debates about brain drain, as some of its best talents migrate to the US for better opportunities. Push for H1B reforms. Reforms like wage-based allocation of H1B visas could disproportionately impact Indian professionals and firms, making India a central stakeholder in the debate. Indian workers and companies advocate for a fairer system that acknowledges their role in addressing US skill shortages. In short, the H1B controversy reflects broader debates about immigration, globalization, and economic policy.
I began by asking Mark on his thoughts on the split down the middle in the Trump camp over the issue of H1B visas.
Well, the president has a coalition that has many different pieces. Every coalition is going to have elements in them that don't agree about everything. And what was really new about this election was the number of people at high levels of the tech industry not just Elon Musk, obviously, but David Sachs and others who were essentially driven out of the Democratic camp because they were basically Democratic leaning all along and backed President Trump. And so, there's a lot there that agrees with President Trump's base. Elon in particular, the rocket ships and everything, the kind of spirit of exploration and adventure and kind of can-do optimism, that resonates with people all over. But the tech industry obviously has made extensive use of foreign workers. The H1B program is the best known vehicle for that, but not the only one. There are L visas. There's all kinds of other things. And it was inevitable that that was going to create some kind of tension. In fact, before Christmas week, when all of this exploded, there had already been several articles. Politico, which is a Washington-based politics publication, wrote an article called something like Stephen Miller versus Elon Musk on immigration. So the potential for it was always there. I think this was actually a useful exercise for the Trump coalition because the new members, the tech people who are now in the coalition, I don't think appreciated how intensely President Trump's voter base actually cared about this issue. And now they do. And I think that's a useful thing to have happened, especially before inauguration. So it's a kind of warm-up for the actual administration.
At one level, Mark, this spat also puts the spotlight on the skill deficit, as it were, in the United States. Or to put it another way, to continue to be the prime country for innovation, you need a continuous supply of skilled labor, which may or may not be available in the United States, and this opens the door for that. So by linking immigration to this skill challenge, hasn't MAGA placed a very difficult trade-off in front of President-elect Trump?
That obviously is the rationale that a lot of the tech industry people offer for continued large-scale immigration, whether it's H1Bs or OPT or whatever it is. But I think the premise is wrong. The United States is a continent-spanning country with 1/3 of a billion people, with a lot of the top educational institutions in the United States. The idea that we can't train a tech workforce is laughable. I mean, it's absurd on its face. The problem is that the continuing importation of large numbers of tech workers, and even down upstream of that, foreign students studying tech, who then later become tech workers, distorts the process of training a tech workforce. And Americans, young people, think in college or thinking about going into college or leaving college, change their decision making and end up going into different lines of work because the tech workforce has increasingly become foreignized. So I would actually submit that the things like the H1B program are actually part of the reason for the skills deficit, if there is one.
But Mark, even if we take your point for a moment, there is an immediate challenge facing the United States, which is China. China is catching up very fast in terms of the tech gap that used to exist between the United States and China. So yes, what you're saying is true, that if you go the organic way, you groom American talent and bring them up to speed, it can happen, it will happen. But right now, there is a clock ticking on this, especially with China's aggressive approach to tech innovation and EVs and critical minerals, etc. So isn't this a moment to actually go the inorganic way to make sure the US continues to wield the advantage?
No, because it's not sustainable. Because creating this conveyor belt of tech talent from abroad is incompatible with developing our own tech talents, and we cannot base on a long-term basis. It's not sustainable to confront the challenge of China with foreign workers. In a sense, this kind of argument that there's an emergency and we need to deal with it now, it's the same kind of argument people made about the Soviet nuclear threat. There's a missile gap, and we have to have this crash program. Then that was a real problem, and a similar thing happened with the launch of Sputnik, the Soviet satellite in the late 50s. They launched the first satellite that actually orbited the Earth. And this was part of the space race. Our response to the space race was a crash program in American schools and universities, government research grants, all of that sort of thing that led literally, little more than 10 years later to the first man on the moon. So if there is an emergency, and I think maybe emergency is a little bit of an exaggeration, but yes, there is an urgent need to counter or to keep up with China's challenge. The way to do that in a sustainable way is to develop our own enormous pool of talent, kind of seasoned with a handful of genuinely top people. But that's not what we're doing now. We're eliminating the incentives or weakening the incentives to fix our own domestic tech development system by importing so many people and basically weakening the need, reducing the need to actually do anything about addressing this skills deficit if it actually exists. Maybe better way to put it would be a sort of inefficient allocation of talent.
But Mark, look at Elon Musk, for example. He's an H1B immigrant, and what he has contributed to the United States is fantastic, and to the world. Forget about US in space or EV space. So it's not that you don't need these kind of geniuses, and they do work for the United States. So how do you manage that?
The thing is, look, I'm as big a fan of Tesla and SpaceX as anybody. In fact, I've a couple times been to the launch facility out in Texas where the super heavies, the ones that are going to Mars, are going. In fact, I remember I was there several years ago, and somebody explained to me that the rocket would return and then these arms would grab it. And I was like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? That's not possible. And it is. He proved it. But, the fact that one person who may have used an H1B visa, although he came to the U.S. as a foreign student, that's a little, but anyway, nonetheless, one example like that isn't really an justification for keeping the program as it is. In other words, that it's the best of all possible visa programs. We're not going to be getting rid of the H1B program. Although, like I said, I would be for that because there are other ways for real geniuses to get in. There's the O visa, for instance. But reforms to it to make it less useful and less to people who will exploit it, less likely to result in the displacement of American workers. Those are perfectly legitimate topics to discuss. And Elon Musk himself, at the end of this long, fight over Christmas week, said that he's always supported reforms to the H-1B program. And so let's talk about concrete reforms that many of which the administration could do on its own without Congress, and some of which the administration in its first iteration, Trump 1.0, actually did try to do. So this isn't a kind of all or nothing debate necessarily, as much as I might be in favor of getting rid of it if I were elected emperor, but I'm not emperor. So let's look at ways of making the H1B program less harmful and more beneficial.
In fact, that's a nice segue to our next question, which is, you have argued a case of reform of the existing H1B program. Can you elaborate your proposal?
Sure. My point was that there's common ground here between the president's voter base that is very hawkish on immigration and wants even legal immigration tightened up, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, president's new tech supporters who, did help him win, and he does owe them something. So there are a number of reforms you can make, but the one that I think was most kind of obvious and pressing and most intuitive that regular people not involved in this issue can understand is that we need to stop giving H-1B visas out by lottery. There's a 85,000 cap per year. And so there's many people from earlier years. That's just in one, that's the flow number, not the stock number. But it's 85,000 are given out a year. And they're given out by lottery. In other words, you submit applications, companies submit applications for workers, and there's always more applications than there are available visas. So the way the USCIS, the office within Homeland Security that runs this, the way they deal with it is by doing lotteries. Well, that's crazy if you want best and brightest. My point was, let's do what the Trump administration tried to do the first time. And like I said, they ran out of time, and then there were court problems and what have you, which is give out the visas to companies based on highest salary. And so I didn't go into a lot of detail, but it wouldn't just be straight highest salary, because then they would only go to places in high cost of living locations, New York and San Francisco, that sort of thing. But like within an industry or an occupation and within a region, you give the visa first to the company offering the highest salary. Because if these are invaluable workers, then we should be giving them visas to the ones whom their employers value the most. And the way you express, or the most concrete and obvious way you express the value you see a new worker likely to create, is the salary you're offering. So, and there are other ways of doing that. You could just raise the minimum salary and keep doing the lottery. In other words, there's a lot of ways to massage the program, to tweak it. But the most obvious is stop giving out visas randomly and give them out to people whom the employers themselves have said they value the most based on the amount of money they're willing to pay them.
So, Mark, what you're saying is that the existing regime may not be thrown out entirely, but it is definitely going to be recalibrated, which means the earlier idea of obtaining H1B visas is relatively history, which means Indian tech companies are being put on notice. But that also brings me to another issue, which is that there is a risk of the Indian American community, which is in the US, becoming collateral damage. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, the Indian American community in this country is pretty diverse. It's politically diverse. It's diverse in a lot of ways. And the idea that changing and modifying the H-1B program is somehow going to be a significant problem for Americans who have roots in the subcontinent just doesn't make sense. I mean, if the president were saying, Indians are all bad and that's why I'm changing this, that would in fact alienate people, and it should alienate people, but that's not what anybody involved in policy making is saying or even thinks. There are people of Indian origin, either American born or immigrants, on all sides of the political spectrum. There are people on the left, the right, you name it. And so this is a normal political debate that all Americans, whatever their origin, should engage in. Some people will, people of Indian background will be on both sides of this debate, and that's a healthy thing. So I don't see this in any way as some kind of threat to Indian Americans. There are, morons on the internet who say all kinds of vulgar and stupid things. It's the internet. That's what you get. But that has nothing to do with the policy making process or even the legitimate policy debate.
There are several takeaways in our conversation with Mark. For one, the H1B program as it exists is well sell past the date. Second, the new H1B version that is likely to be introduced will put a greater emphasis on the metric of skill. In other words, the era of body shopping or software coolies is over. Third, the Indian community is unlikely to face a backlash. Fingers crossed here. Finally, this kind of restrictions that the United States is likely to impose on the free flow of personnel from countries like India is likely to become a foreign policy challenge. A lot of it depends on how President Trump rides the immigration tiger that tilted the scales in his battle for the White House. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please to share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.